Two steps forward, one step back. Remolding trails into track. Perhaps failure got you in sack? Just smile and say, I will be back. This quote describes my personal perspective on this year's TEDx. However, it is only a small constituent of the vast spectrum of what the theme may mean to everyone who's present here with us this evening. Good evening. My name is Roshni Das.
And my name is Amina Asad.
And we will be your hosts for TEDxFCCollege 2021. On the behalf of our team, we warmly welcome you all. In the spirit of ideas worth spreading, TEDx is a program of local, self-organized events that bring people together to share a TED-like experience. At a TEDx event, TED Talk videos and live speakers combine to spark deep discussion and connection. These local, self-organized events are branded TEDx, where X is equal to independently organized TED event. The TED conference provides general guidance with the TEDx program, but individual TEDx events are self-organized, remaining subject to certain rules and regulations.
At FC College, year after year, TEDx is always hosted as a magnanimous on-campus event. It's one of the biggest and the most looked forward to events of the year. This time, however, having an on-campus event was not possible due to the unprecedented COVID-19 situation and the lockdown situation. However, it is always said that time never really stops, and we have to get used to what the new normal is. Keeping exactly that in mind, our team decided to put in our best efforts to host TEDx 2021 as an online event, and we are so proud to be pulling this off as the first ever virtual TEDx event. Our team has put in monumental amounts of efforts to ensure the smooth execution of this event, and we really hope that you have a great time with us today evening. I would like to thank all our guest speakers for being on board with us today. We are truly honored to have such esteemed speakers with us today. I would also like to welcome all the audience. We have a huge number of people who are watching us from the YouTube live. I extend them a very warm welcome. We hope you have a memorable time being a part of TEDx 2021, which is the first virtual online event, Online TEDx 2021. With that said, I would like to request Subhavish Sajid, who is the co-organizer of this year's TEDx, to brief us about this year's theme. After that, we will officially begin. Over to you, Subhavish.
As we have all heard, one step forward, two steps back is still one step forward, and that is one of our biggest motivations at this year's TEDxFC College. We want to celebrate lives and ideas that have managed to take one step forward despite any adversities they face, be it in their personal lives or in their community itself. This year, we have decided that we want to celebrate all those who, despite any number of setbacks, have managed to take their steps forward, inspired those around us and themselves as well. Without further ado, I will hand it back to our two hosts so they can continue and invite our first speaker to speak.
Our first speaker this evening is intrinsic to the diverse world of art and is no stranger to the beauty of nature. Introducing Ms. Amina Hashmi, who is a freelance artist, designer, illustrator, and a plant enthusiast. The main source of inspiration for her artwork is nature. Her work is a love letter to plants, fungi, insects, birds, animals, and all sorts of marine life. She works in various mediums, including watercolor, oil paints, digital, flat plate sculptures, as well as creative and conceptual photography. Please welcome Ms. Amina Hashmi.
Hello, everyone. I hope you all are doing great. And thank you for the introduction. And I would also like to thank everyone for having me here today. Like the introduction, my name is Amna Hashmi, and I'm an artist, a plant enthusiast, and I also go by the name as Podewali, which is basically plant lady. And my today's talk is linked with my other name, the Podewali. So 2 years back, I developed a panic disorder after going through a series of traumatic events. It was a very traumatizing and a very scary situation for me. And I wasn't able to figure out what to do because I was not aware of that illness. I didn't know that panic attacks existed. I just thought that it's stress in general. So initially, I thought I was getting a heart attack. I would end up in emergency 3 to 4 times a day, and the doctor there advised me to seek therapy. So I went to a therapist, and unfortunately, it wasn't compatible with my situation because it wasn't compatible with my situation because I couldn't leave my house. I would get a panic attack when I would leave my house, and it was really scary. So I eventually became quite hopeless and helpless, and I didn't want to do anything with my life. I was quite scared, and so I was just sitting there all dull, all blank, and one day my father decided to gift me with something, and he gave me these 6 beautiful baby plants, and he asked me to look after them. It was like, you know what, just water them, and all you have to do is get up early morning because sorry about that. All you have to do is wake up early morning because because you water the plants early morning or in the evening. So I thought, okay, this is I can manage this task, and I started taking care of those 6 baby plants, and this also helped to fix my sleeping schedule. I didn't get enough sleeping hours. I would panic all the time. I would be depressed. So my sleeping hours were like 3 hours, and that's not enough. So waking up early to water the plants helped me fix my sleep schedule. And one day when I was when I was going to water my plants, I noticed something really pretty sitting on one of the plant pots, and it was a beautiful moth. I haven't seen anything like it before in my life. And in that moment, I just became curious. I wanted to live another day to see what happens. So that tiny moment, that tiny moth moment was my turning point. It was, I didn't notice it at that time that it was my hopeful moment. It was like a turning point in my life. It all happened very organically. So And here I would also like to add that one of the, I think one of the major toxic trait we all have in ourselves is the unfair and unjust expectations that we develop from ourselves. And because of these unfair and unjust expectations, we ignore these tiny moments of joy, happiness, or accomplishment. So coming back to that moth moment, I got really excited, and I wanted to live another day to see what will happen on these 6 baby plants. And from there, I started researching about the plants that my father gave me, and I started researching about them. I started reading about them, and I need to tell you that before that, I used to consider plants very boring. I used to think botany is a very dry subject and very dull and boring. But after that moth moment, I really got fascinated by it. And I started researching about it. I started studying about the plants and their types. And this also helped me to design schedule for me, a routine for me, which consisted of very small tasks like a 5-minute walk, going outside, a 5-minute workout session, eating healthy, drinking 6 glasses of water, like baby steps, small steps to a healthy lifestyle. So I started following that routine, which I designed for myself. And I remained consistent. I remained committed to that routine. And I also started utilizing my terrace space to grow more plants there. I don't have a lawn, but I have a terrace space. So I started growing plants over there. And I would notice all these tiny insects that would visit my garden. And I was so fascinated by their textures, their colors, their symmetry, that really inspired my artwork. So one day I harvested some basil seeds from our street, and I wanted to grow them. I wanted to, grow a basil plant from seeds. I wanted to try germination, because before that I used to just buy plants from a plant shop. So yeah, I got 3 pots, and I sowed some seeds in these 3 pots. And then I waited and I waited and I waited for 3 weeks, but no basil plants. It was a failure. That experiment was a failure. And surprisingly, I didn't give up. I did my research. I asked other plant enthusiasts what could be the problem in this experiment. Maybe they can help me identify the issue. So in the next batch of the pots, I added compost and I sowed some seeds. And the seeds germinated within 3 days. So this is a very small experiment, but it taught me 3 valuable lessons. Like the most valuable lessons I could learn, that helped change my personality. So yeah, number 1, patience. Because I waited 3 weeks and then again a week for the for the seeds to germinate. So it somehow helped me develop patience. And before that, before the gardening and everything, I was quite impatient. I would be like, no, I really want this to be done right now and stuff like that. So after that experience, I developed patience. And the second thing that I developed was the strength to accept failure and loss. I mean, failure and loss is a very important, very essential point for growth. We always sometimes, not always, let the perfectionist in us dominate us. And the perfectionist is like, oh, you failed, you cannot do this again. So we don't try that thing again. We are like, okay, I tried growing plants from seeds. It didn't work out. So I failed. That means I cannot grow plants, and I'm not going to try it again. That's the perfectionist in you talking. And the perfectionist in you is telling you that failure, is letting you not to accept failure. So this is the second most valuable thing that I learned from that tiny experiment, and it was the strength to accept failure and loss. And the third most important thing that I learned from that experiment was not to develop unfair expectation, was to have realistic expectations. Now, what would be the unfair expectations from this experiment, from this tiny seed experiment? The unrealistic and unfair expectations would be the seeds must germinate into baby basil plants. They should. But the realistic expectation gives you a 50-50 chance. It prepares you for failure and success, for both. So this tiny experiment taught me all of these wonderful and valuable lessons. And I kept to my routine. And I noticed a change in my panic disorder. I noticed that my panic attacks reduced from 4 to 2 a day, and their time also reduced. I would get panic attacks for 40 minutes, 30 minutes. Each panic attack would last this long, and they reduced to 15 minutes. So I kept on doing this. I kept on adding more skills and hobbies to my routine. Like I picked up knitting. And knitting, I think, is a very therapeutic hobby. I think everyone should do it. The repetitive motion, it calms you down. So I picked that up as well. And all of these healthy, step by step, all of these healthy activities helped me overcome my panic attacks. It took me 1.5 years to overcome my panic disorder, which was a very extreme disorder, and I wasn't able to do anything in my life. So all of these lessons that I learned, and I wanted to share it with other people as well. So I started a page on Instagram, and I shared my gardening experience there. And I then experimented with my artwork. I started creating art pieces that were inspired by the insects that visited my garden. And I was so fascinated by their form and their shape and the symmetry in them. So I started creating art pieces from them and started selling them. So I started working again. I work as a freelance artist. And all of this helped me come back to my work routine. I can now go out. I can now drive. So I know that all of our circumstances are different. I know that. And if I was able to take a break, some of the people cannot. They don't have that option. But I feel that the lessons that I've shared here can be applied to everyone in some degree. So the takeaway from this experience of mine is hold on to hope. It may be tiny. It may be just a tiny moth, a beautiful moth. Hold on to it, but make sure that it's useful for you, that it's beneficial for you, and it's not harmful. People seek for other harmful options, and they label it as hope. No, that's it. The hope should be useful for you, should be beneficial for you. And when we become hopeless, what I have noticed from my experience, we let the anxiety, stress, and even our negative traits dominate us. So hope is very important for a healthy lifestyle. And the second point is say no to unfair and unjust expectations, not only from ourselves, but from others as well, because unfair expectations limit our growth. They don't let us grow. They don't let us experiment, and they bind us, they restrict us. So the third point here is do not ignore the tiny moments in your life, the tiny moments of joy, success, and accomplishment. Always try to acknowledge them, because these will set as building blocks for a healthy and a positive mindset. So like that moth moment, it was like quite tiny. And that seed experiment, that was also tiny. But the lesson and that sense of accomplishment from the tiny experiment was huge, was like a turning point in my life. And the fourth point that I would like to focus on is awareness. We need to learn about these illnesses. We need to research about these illnesses so that we can help ourselves, maybe, and maybe others. We can assist them. Because when I was getting a panic attack, the people around me didn't know what to do, because, like myself, they were also unaware of the situation. So I think these illnesses, we can research about them, read about them, and develop some sort of empathy towards other who are suffering from them. And the final one is gardening. I would really want you all to pick up this hobby if you can, if you are able to make time for it, because it is not only beneficial for your mental and physical health, but you're also contributing to the environment. So bring flowers that attract bees, because bee population is decreasing. We all know that, right? So just plant flowers that attract the bees. And it is also said that my brother was telling me, he was saying that it is said that look at the shapes in nature. They are more soothing for the eyes as compared to the man-made structures, like the concrete structures, the buildings and all that. So when you have that tiny green space in your house, it will affect your mental health and will improve it. So but only bring plants if you can make time for them, um, if you can take care of them, because they are living beings. So I hope this experience, that this was helpful for you. My experience was helpful. My recovery process was helpful for you. And once again, thank you for having me here. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Amina. That was truly a very, very inspirational talk. And the way, you highlighted those specific points, at least for me, they've given me a lot of food for thought. And I'm sure same is the case with everyone else. More and more power to you. Your story is absolutely incredible. And we wish you all the best for your future endeavors. Thank you so much for your talk. I would now like to invite our next speaker, Mr. Hamza Hayauddin, a culinary designer. Mr. Hamza thinks up dishes and truly plates them to perfection, taking his one step forward through his unwavering passion and love for food and storytelling. We are sure that his story is really going to leave you very, very inspired. Please welcome Mr. Hamza.
I'm hoping everyone can hear me. I'm not sure if the button is correct. It's working. But yeah, comfort food. What comes to mind when you think of that phrase? Food is a powerful expression of love, vulnerability, and even identity. And there's certain dishes that we can all relate to. Elders peeling and cutting our fruit for us as a show of affection, or binging on chocolate after a bad day, extra chutney on our Afghani chips, even though our parents always insist that it's unhygienic, or trying to get the challi wala's attention when everyone else is shouting, Khan, 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 after school. But most of these associations that we have with food are positive. And that's because we look at food primarily through the lens of consumption and excess. That's our privilege. We have culinary delights like dirty burgers that have more than 3 patties on them, or we'll have freak shakes, buffets, free refills. All of this revolves around food giving us comfort. At the same time, these relationships are becoming increasingly impersonal because food is just another activity we partake in. Kya karna hai? Chalo kuch khate hain yaar. Which relegates this rich human experience to a passive time pass. We stop engaging with food beyond the superficial relationship. And I understand why we wouldn't want to think about animals being slaughtered or people being exploited for our dinner. But we've become allergic to even having an unsavory conversation about food. There's this implicit agreement that food and discomfort don't belong together. Why? We're very okay with acquiring tastes, which is in and of itself an uncomfortable experience. Like if you think about it, it's Stockholm syndrome for your taste buds, for your tongue. So why do we actively ignore this unpleasant but very necessary flip side of the culinary coin? A big part of it is vulnerability. In order to embrace food or any visceral experience that requires human connection, we have to make ourselves vulnerable, which is an uncomfortable feeling because sometimes it feels bad. Food tells stories. It tells stories of how we got to where we are. It also tells stories of where we are right now. Often these anecdotes are about it bringing us together, but tonight I'd like to go a step further and share my vulnerability with all of you. Food does bring us together, but it also often does the opposite, where it draws structural boundaries that differentiate us from them, me from you, based on what and how we eat. My most powerful memory of this involves a kid named Muzammil Mirza. And it was when I was in 7th grade in the US. Muzammil and I were the only two Pakistanis at school, which immediately after 9/11 should have brought us close together. Except I had been in the US for years at that point, and I was still struggling for acceptance among all the cool kids who had names like Matt and TJ and Jonathan. So during an icebreaker, they asked us what our favorite foods were. And we said things like, cheeseburgers, PB&J, pizza. Muzammil didn't. Muzammil said biryani. And all of the American kids started laughing. All the cool kids started mocking him. Hi, my name is Muzammil, and my favorite food is brr. And they kept making fun of it. And he turned to me, and I was the only other Desi kid in the class. So he turns to me and he says, come on, man, you know what that is. Spoiler alert, yes, of course I know what biryani is. We all know what biryani is. But I was a 13-year-old, and I'd been bullied for the majority of my life growing up for being the weird outsider. And I was this close to getting acceptance and fitting in with the cool kids. So Muzammil threatened all of that progress I had made, and I couldn't allow that. So I looked him in the eyes and I said, no, bro, I have no idea what you're talking about. And I started laughing along with the other kids. That look of hurt and betrayal in his eyes, that haunts me to this day, to the point that I still can't eat a bit of biryani without thinking about him. Now, I'm sure some of you can relate. Either you've been in my position or you've been in Muzammil's. And I've experienced the same thing even here in Beacon House, where kids were regularly shamed for their lunch boxes, both what was inside the lunchbox and also how it looked on the outside. So I don't know how many of you remember from going to private schools here, but there were tiers. It was like a system of hierarchy, where the coolest kids had those metal tiffins with the cutlery inside and like a nice meal prepped from home. Then the second tier were kids who could afford to eat at the canteen. Then was those fancy plastic containers that had like the carrot and the chili pepper sides and like different Japanese prints on top. And finally were the kids who just had generic Tupperware style containers. Then came what was inside those lunch boxes, where we would judge children for having a smelly salan or a soggy pakora or paratha. And we'd trade our sandwiches for his brownies and her cup of Sprite from the canteen for this Shami burger. But we often reduced kids to their social worth, and that was determined by what their mothers or their cooks prepared for them that day. And this classism is so deeply entrenched in our culinary history that even today, the term burger has gained mainstream acceptance, but none of the nuance or conversations about privilege that should accompany it are ever discussed. Food can even be traumatic. I struggled with an eating disorder the majority of my adult life. And in a culture of shame that permeates the entire act of eating, it's really not surprising. We use words like guilty pleasure or cheat meals. We obsess over calories and macros. We judge people's portion sizes. We give up carbs before weddings. Eat this, not that. Eat more, eat less. I know the majority of you all viewing this have either experienced or witnessed some version of this. And that's heartbreaking. But notice how these same stories that at one point set us apart and ostracized us are now bringing us together as common ground to bond over and even laugh over despite the discomfort. That's what I mean when I say food tells stories. My own style is something I refer to as progressive cuisine, which sounds pretentious, but honestly, at its core, it's quite simple. It just means I ask questions. There are technical questions about the dish or the food itself, like, can I make this invisible? How can I trick my diner into tasting something that isn't there? How do you redefine a bun kebab? But there are also greater existential questions, and that's where the conversation gets interesting. Is there any originality in cuisine? What does it mean to create something? Take doodh soda. Love it or hate it, it's a Pakistani staple. But this drink's origins aren't Pakistani at all. In fact, it's a 17th century British invention where they used to mix milk and soda water together, like club soda. And that was a recreational beverage. When it came here, we began sweetening it because we have a sweet tooth. So we started adding sugar. But eventually, the cost of sugar and soda was more expensive than Sprite or 7-Up. So we started mixing Sprite and 7-Up into it. So the Brits brought this to the mainstream, but we gave it masala. Do either of us own it? Along those lines, what is tradition? Is it the ingredients you use, or is it the spirit of a dish? A restaurant opened up here selling authentic Neapolitan pizza. Now, in order to qualify as Neapolitan, you have to have two things. One, it has to consist of San Marzano tomatoes. And two, it has to have buffalo mozzarella from Campania. But those things work in Naples because they're a driving distance away. In like 2 hours, you can get them all brought to your restaurant. So it arrives fresh daily. If you put those tomatoes in a tin and stuff it with preservatives, and you freeze that mozzarella and then have to unfreeze it a month later, is that consistent with the principles behind that pizza? Alternatively, what if it's not about the tomatoes and cheese? What if it's just using the highest quality, locally sourced produce available to you? What if you're getting tomatoes freshly picked from the orchard, dirt still on them, from a farmer whose family has been doing this for generations? What if you get buffalo mozzarella from an artisan in the city who's using milk from our local blue-eyed buffaloes that are really cute, but also like kind of creepy? It might not taste the same, but isn't that a more accurate reflection of what Neapolitan pizza is, which is a celebration of local produce and technique? But along those lines, what does shopping locally or organically even mean? Does local mean grown in Islamabad? Does it mean limited to the Sabzi Mandi and Itwar Bazaar or farms around the city? What about getting fresh herbs from Lahore or black currants from Skardu or rock lobster from Gwadar? Is it just using Pakistani produce rather than imported ingredients? What does organic mean? How much of the ability to farm organically and purchase these products is rooted in our privilege? Like, let's say there's one farmer who's been raising poultry for generations. His family did it, his grandparents did it, their grandparents did it. And then let's say there's a new privileged Islamabadi boy like me who suddenly starts an organic chicken coop. Are my eggs actually worth 3 times what his are? Even though his are ostensibly probably better quality, but he doesn't have the same resources to get that papa that makes it organic? How do you elevate cuisine without exploiting or commodifying it? Food, especially cultural staples, is one of the most unfortunate victims of capitalism, and it's often far removed from the people closest to it. Like, if you think about for a second how many Asian restaurants we have in Islamabad alone, right? Now we think of how many countries are in Asia. There are 50 countries in Asia. Are you telling me that any of these restaurants is serving dishes from 50 different countries? Like, what is Asian food? How do we, in good faith, reduce the entirety of this continent, all 50 countries with its nationalities and cultures and histories? How do we reduce that to sushi, noodles, dumplings, and braised meat? There's a fine line between learning from a culture and profiteering off it. Now, the analogy I like to give when people ask me how I differentiate appreciation and appropriation is, you're appreciating my food when you come to my dinners and you like my dishes so much that you ask me for the recipe and I give it to you and then you reproduce it. You're appropriating if you steal my cookbook, start your own restaurant using my recipes, present them as your own, and then leave me a bad review on Facebook or Instagram. So I don't know if there are any questions here, because there usually aren't the questions this big, but it's important to ask the questions because that's how we expand our understanding of the world and also how we hold ourselves and the space we're in accountable. So for me, progression is about taking that step forward. It's adapting to new environments, ingredients, people. It's about not forgetting the past, but finding new ways to present and maintain its relevance. So we honor cuisines by exploring the crossroads and the intersections between them. So I struggle a bit with ADHD, and I know how hard it is to sit through 15 minutes nonstop of a lecture. So I'd like to do an interactive activity with you guys, give you an example of what I'm talking about in a practical sense. So if there's people in the audience here on both YouTube and Zoom, I'd like you to suggest some desi dishes or desi ingredients. And I'm going to do a quick 2-minute game where I try to recreate that in a modernist way, which still respects the original story, but tells it in a new light. So go ahead, type stuff up if you guys want. And I'll give you 30 seconds, 45 seconds to submit, and then we'll go through that and make a couple of new dishes just intellectually, conceptually in front of you. Ooh, a lot of suggestions. Okay, cool. We'll do two. I see Shami kebab and Afghani burger. For Shami kebab, actually, there's a funny story about this. My first interaction with fusion, no, I don't call it fusion because fusion often requires a lot of appropriation. I call this crossroads or crossover cuisine, progressive Pakistani. So one of my first dishes was the Shami kebab, redefined, and I converted the Shami kebab into a golgappa. And it's because I blew it up into its core components. Great. Actually, someone said Golgappa. So this is actually going to show you the crossover from Shami to Golgappa. Shami kebab at its core is a couple of ingredients. A Shami burger, let's say. It's got a chickpea cutlet, which is the Shami. It's got a bun, which is a bread. It's got pickled onions. I forgot. Sirke wale pyaz. And it's got a sauce. So how do you recreate that in a way that still respects all those ingredients, but gives it to you in a new textural format? So when you look at it, you don't think this is a Shami Ande burger. I took the bun and I turned the bun into a golgappa, but I made my own golgappa with a bit more starchy flour. So it was actually quite chewy as well as crisp. It could hold the sauce. I took the Shami kebab and I emulsified it into a mousse, like a puree. That was piped inside the golgappa. It was topped with a pickled cucumber salad. And then it was topped with fried egg, which I had shaken through until it was like a crumble, crisp kind of floss. So all of this recreates all the original flavors. And I put a sauce of imli pani inside. So it looks like a golgappa. It smells like a golgappa. When you put it in your mouth, you get all the flavors of an ande wala burger. I do the same thing with an Afghani burger in a similar way, where let's say an Afghani burger is what? It is a naan, it is chips, and it is a hot dog and a chutney. What I'd do if I was to do it right off the top, I would turn it into a new style of a hot dog. So I would take a quality meat, like a cut from either goat or lamb. I'd slow braise that. I would chop it up or pull it along with, let's say, apples, diced potatoes, a little bit of chutney, and breadcrumbs. And I'd turn that into a whole new sausage. Then you just dip that in a batter and you fry it. So you have a corn dog, which is a very American or Western thing, but it's got all the flavors and ingredients that make up a good Afghani burger. So again, you look at it and you're like, I don't know what this is. And you taste it and it tastes like nostalgia. It tastes like home. So one of the most frequent questions I get is, what is the ghee spot? And honestly, it's one of the hardest to answer. I guess the simplest explanation is that it's my response to my experiences in the food industry. We talk about sustainability and food waste, and it's true, those are problems. But often we forget the human exploitation that occurs. When I was working at Ramsay, which is a subtle flex, we would routinely put in 80 to 100-hour weeks. And it's this way in most top restaurants, where you're working 6 a.m. till 1 a.m., 5 to 6 days a week, with one 30-minute break in between. That's not sustainable. It's a toxic and extremely ableist environment. And as someone who struggled with both anxiety and depression, it broke me. You know, most days I'd get home so exhausted that the only thing I had the energy to make was a bowl of cereal. So I'm working on the top restaurants on the planet, And I get home and my dinner is cornflakes. I'm so burnt out from cooking. So why do we work ourselves to the bone for the sake of this grind? Why do we dismiss people who burn out or can't handle it? Why do we call them soft? It's a byproduct of this entitlement we have to food 24/7 and ignorance of the person on the other side of the counter. Whether it's the fast food employee who's 2 minutes late with our burgers or the sabzi wala we're haggling with over 10 rupees, we don't generally care. We don't care where our meat comes from or how it was treated before or after it was slaughtered. We don't care whether we're consuming vegetables or fish that are out of season. We don't care if we're accelerating their extinction or the ecological cost of doing it. So how have we allowed this to become norm, this to become mainstream and not the aberration? Or even the not so subtle classism that exists within fine dining and this culture of manners. Like, what are manners? Knowing which fork or which spoon to use during hushed conversations on white linen where everything is 2 inches apart? Why isn't there more laughter? Why aren't we eating with our hands? Why has this sterile, clinical approach to dining replaced the sensory carnival that a night out should be? So the key spot is my attempt to create an intersectionally feminist space, which explores all of these crossovers. It's a place where I critically engage with concepts like sustainability or tradition and examine the structures whose authority we just unquestionably accept. It's a safe space where we can ask all these questions, the uncomfortable ones, and have these difficult conversations. Every ingredient is freshly sourced from within Pakistan. Where possible, I use small-scale family businesses. As a nation, we waste 40% of our food, both as raw ingredients and post-cooking biomass. So we have a zero waste policy where leftover ingredients that are raw are used to provide free meals for day laborers, and non-consumable food trim afterwards is composted to be reused as fertilizer. To reflect the global wage and employment gap, women diners pay 75% of what men do because that's the global wage gap. So let's say if men are paying 1,000, women are paying 750. And that difference in between goes towards distributing sustainable hygiene products in underserved areas. So we're literally funding menstrual hygiene. It's one thing to say, woo, women's economic empowerment, feminism, and then you go and you hire a bunch of dudes for minimum wage. And that's not what I'm about. So I only hire and collaborate with women, with preference given to marginalized members of society, so differently abled, religious minorities, trans women. Seasonality is a core tenet, right? So the chef's table is only open a few times a month. The employees only work 2-3 days a week because my personal belief is that the work week should be 3 days long. You need at least 1 day after to recover. You need 1 day at least to spend with your friends and family, 1 day to pursue your personal passions and projects, and then 1 day to handle the other demands of life. It's progressive Pakistani cuisine, where you're not just what you eat, but you're how you eat and where you eat as well. The menu is constantly evolving. It's an ode to our food tradition and the current season's harvest. Sometimes it's in this kitchen behind me. Sometimes it's a food truck. Sometimes it's a pop-up or a picnic. The conversation extends beyond just social justice, and we ask questions of the food itself. What can this ingredient do for us? And more importantly, what can I do to celebrate this ingredient? What is the next step of evolution for our culinary techniques? It's a place where we realize that as long as you're not being oppressive, there are no rules. Do whatever you want. Engage in your whimsy. Eat with your hands. Slurp your food. Lick the plate. I get this, and one of the biggest things I get when I talk about this isn't going to work. It's too idealistic. Men aren't going to get behind this. Your food is too esoteric. You need to scale. I hate that. You need to scale. You'll never make the big bucks. Real talk, right? Let's be completely honest. There are very few, if any, social movements or changes which didn't seem ridiculous or impossible at the time. That's the way we get gaslit into maintaining the status quo. So what happens if I fail? I get out there and I make something that doesn't. And you do that by getting it wrong over and over and over again. For the longest time, I couldn't make pie crusts. Like, it's a very simple thing. It's sugar, butter, flour, and some cold water. And I just couldn't do it. There's very little to hide behind, so you have to nail every part of it. And whenever I try, it was either too thick or too thin, not enough butter, too much butter, undercooked, overcooked. And it demoralized me because here I am. I'm a chef who's worked in some of the best kitchens in the world. And I can't even make a pie crust. I think it's a family curse because my younger brother, his birth, he loves chicken pot pie, and he can't make pie crust consistently either. Like we struggle. So he'd asked me to help him, and one day he was making it and he was struggling, so I made him the crust, and it was perfect. And then a couple of months later, he was making it again, and he asked me to make the crust, and it was perfect. And this kept happening. And then one day he just turns to me and says, "Why is your pie crust consistently right?" And I realized it's because I've ruined more pie crusts than he's made overall, period. So don't be afraid to ask questions. Don't be afraid to be a misfit. Don't be afraid to get it wrong, because you will. You will sound stupid. You will be weird. You will mess up your pie crusts. And that's fine because you're still taking that one step forward. Thank you for attending my TED Talk. I've always wanted to say that.
Thank you so much, Mr. Hamza, for sharing such an inspirational and wonderful talk with us. It was truly, truly inspiring. I would just like to remind our audience that for the first time ever, we are also live on YouTube just right now. Now it's time to welcome our first performer of the evening. Music has the quality of enriching one's very soul, and our first performer is no stranger to it. This young, talented musician and vocalist has been performing music for the last 11 years. He plays a vast variety of instruments. Currently, he is the music coordinator of Foreman Music Society. Please welcome FCCU's very own talent, Simon Samuel.
First of all, I would like to thank the management uh, for inviting me in such a beautiful event. And secondly, it's my privilege that I'm performing uh, for such an honorable people. And I hope everyone will enjoy the next 5 minutes. Thank you. I hope I'm audible.
We can hear you.
Okay. लेके बाहों में हम लिखते जाएं राहों में हम वो दिल ही नहीं है जो नामे मोहब्बत नामे वफा ना करे हो दिल की लगी कुछ और भी दिल को दीवाना करे दिल की लगी कुछ और भी दिल को दीवाना करे दौलत पुजारी हुस्न व्यापारी बातों के कच्चे हवा सवारी चल दिल मेरे छोड़ ये फेरे ये दुनिया झूठी लोग लुटेरे चल दिल मेरे छोड़ ये फेरे ये दुनिया झूठी लोग लुटेरे चल दिल मेरे अपनी कहानी रो रो सुनानी हमसे ना होगी ऐसी नादानी अपनी कहानी रो रो सुनानी हमसे ना होगी ऐसी नादानी चल दिल मेरे छोड़े तेरे ये दुनिया झूठी लोग लुटेरे चल दिल मेरे छोड़े तेरे ये दुनिया झूठी लोग लुटेरे चल दिल मेरे झूठी अदाएं खोटी अनाएं कितने फख्र से चेहरे सजाएं झूठी अदाएं खोटी अनाएं कितने फख्र से चेहरे सजाएं चल दिल मेरे छोड़े तेरे ये दुनिया झूठी लोग लुटेरे चल दिल मेरे छोड़े तेरे ये दुनिया झूठी लोग लुटेरे चल दिल मेरे Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Simon. That was an amazing performance, and I personally loved it, and I'm sure everyone else did too. It goes without saying that you are extremely talented, and thank you so much for your lovely performance. I would now like to move ahead with the speakers. And next up, we have Ms. Kainat Azhar, who is an ASP at Police Service of Pakistan. An interesting thing about her is that she writes when she cannot sleep. Let's listen to her share her experience of taking that one step forward through her role as an ASP and providing women all over Pakistan a truly remarkable, a truly incredible role model to look up to. Please welcome Ms. Kainat Azhar.
Assalamualaikum. I hope I am audible to everyone. I am Kainat Hussain Khan, and I am serving as Assistant Superintendent of Police in the Police Services of Pakistan. And as the host has already introduced me, I also write at times. So today, the topic that I want to shed light on is why do we need women at the positions of power? This topic is very, very close to my heart because coming from an area, I'm from Balochistan, coming from an area where women are very, very deprived of their rights. And I have seen the women going through a lot just because of their gender. I want to talk about this. So, first of all, I would like to take you all back to the society when we all were hunters and gatherers. In that time, it is said that the role of women was to provide to take care of the family. जो खवातीन थी उनसे ये एक्सपेक्ट किया जाता था कि वो घरों पे रहेंगी और वो जितना भी सोसाइटी का स्ट्रक्चर है उसे लेके चलेंगी while there were men were outside for the hunt to gather food for the family. And the thing is that कि अगर हम उस वक्त की खवातीन को देखें, they used to take care of the babies, they used to take care of the sick, the elderly, they used to take care of the society in the absence of their men too. उस वक्त भी उनका managerial role था with the advent of और other things and आगे आगे जिस तरह से हमारी जो है सोसाइटी बढ़ती गई उन्होंने जिस तरह से हम लोगों की सोसाइटी बढ़ती गई चीज़ों को रूल्स इतने सेपरेट हो गए ये दोनों के जो खवातीन थी वो घरों तक महदूद रह गई और जो मर्द थे उनका काम बाहर तक महदूद कर दिया गया दोनों को एक दूसरे के कामों में दखल अंदाजी करने का एक तरह से सोसाइटी ने सैंक्शन लगा दिया कि हमें उसमें नहीं जाना है लेकिन आज क्योंकि हम 21वीं सदी में हैं and as our workforce is also diversified now because more women are getting education, वो अच्छी positions पे आना चाहती हैं, वो चाहती हैं कि वो ऐसी positions में हो जहाँ वो decision making कर सके। तो ख़वातीन का होना और उनका रोल होना किसी भी चीज़ में जहाँ पे वो कोई पोजीशन ऑफ पावर लेके या वहाँ पे बैठ के वो दूसरी ख़वातीन और इवन उन लोगों के लिए भी जो मार्जिनलाइज्ड कम्युनिटीज़ हैं वहाँ पे फैसले कर सकें, ये बहुत ज़्यादा ज़रूरी है। एक मैं रिपोर्ट पढ़ रही थी 1-2 दिन पहले, उसके अंदर इस चीज़ का ज़िक्र था, फोर्ब्स की रिपोर्ट थी 2020 की, एंड इट वाज़ अबाउट द यूएसए प्राइवेट सेक्टर। In that report, it was mentioned that less than 5% of the females in USA are at the CEO level. Now, this is about the USA that we look up to as one of the most developed nations in the world. So, अगर हम पाकिस्तान की बात करें तो हम अपने आप को कहाँ पे खड़ा करेंगे? I have no idea. And it is not only about getting more powerful, and it is not a rat race जहाँ पे हमें जो है दूसरे genders, for example, men से हमें आगे निकलना है. It is something that is about creating balance. Not only the balance in the workforce, but also the balance in the society at large. Because एक तो हमारी population में it is almost like half of the population is female. Then हमारी workforce में अब new inductions जो हो रही हैं क्योंकि उनके अंदर ख़वातीन भी ज़्यादा हैं, तो हमें उनके मसाइल को समझने के लिए ख़वातीन की ज़रूरत है, क्योंकि इसके बगैर हम inclusive decision making नहीं कर सकते. If there is some boss of yours, just imagine, who cannot even understand the extent of your problem, how would you expect that boss to solve your problem? That boss is not going to solve anything अगर उसको इस बात का इदराक ही नहीं हुआ कि आपका मसला किस हद तक आपके लिए मसला है. हो सकता है कि वो मसला उसके लिए एग्जिस्ट ही ना करता हो. वहाँ पे हम प्रिविलेज की बात करते हैं. अगर तो इतने ज़्यादा वो प्रिविलेज्ड हैं और वो इस चीज़ को समझ नहीं रहे हैं, तो सबसे ज़्यादा ज़रूरी चीज़ तो यही है कि वहाँ पे अगर ख़वातीन होंगी जो ख़वातीन ही के मसाइल को ज़्यादा बेहतर तौर पे समझ सकेंगी, तो ऑब्वियस बात है कि वो उनका सॉल्यूशन भी निकाल सकेंगी. वो किसी ना किसी तरह से, हो सकता है किसी और वे से या आउट ऑफ वे जाके उस चीज़ को किसी तरह बेहतर करने की तरफ गामज़न करते हैं. हो सकता है कि मसला 100% सॉल्व ना हो, लेकिन ये भी तो मुमकिन है कि शायद वो कोई 25% सॉल्व हो जाए, वो 50% हल हो जाए. And that is very important, not only for the females in the society, but also for the other marginalized sections of the society. For example, transgenders जिस तरह से हैं. A few days back, I met some transgenders, and उनके मुताबिक ये चीज़ जो है ख़वातीन को भी इवन फॉर किसी भी पोजीशन ऑफ पावर में देखना, दे लुक अप टू द फीमेल्स इन दोज पोजीशंस. क्योंकि जो मेरी उनसे बातचीत हुई उस बात से यही अखज़ किया जा सकता है कि जिस जगह पे वो कोई 20-25 साल पहले किसी खातून को नहीं देखते थे, अगर वो इस वक्त किसी खातून को देखते हैं तो ये भी मुमकिन है कि अगले 20-25 साल बाद वहाँ पे कोई ट्रांसजेंडर बैठा हो. जस्ट इमेजिन, आप पास्ट में चले जाइए, वहाँ पे आप कोई 20-25 साल ही पीछे चले जाएं, वहाँ पे जो बॉस और सेक्रेटरी के रोल्स हैं, इट वुड ऑलवेज बी अ मेल बॉस एंड अ फीमेल सेक्रेटरी. ठीक है, तो लेकिन अब अगर हम बात करें तो टू सम एक्सटेंट द रोल्स आर रिवर्स्ड एट सम प्लेसेस. बहुत अच्छे हमारे पास रोल मॉडल्स भी इस तरह से फीमेल्स मौजूद हैं. जब एक ट्रांसजेंडर इस तरह से एक पहले मार्जिनलाइज्ड कम्युनिटी जो फीमेल्स थी, टू सम एक्सटेंट वो किसी ना किसी तरह से हमारी पैट्रियार्कल सोसाइटी में मार्जिनलाइज हो रही थी, उनको देख के अगर उनको ये कॉन्फिडेंस आ रहा है या ये मोटिवेशन मिल रही है या उनको ये लगता है कि अगर ख़वातीन होंगी तो हो सकता है कि वो हमारे मसाइल भी समझ सकें. बिकॉज सोशल कंस्ट्रक्शन तो यही बताती है या स्टडीज़ हमें यही बताती हैं कि जितनी भी फीमेल्स हैं, मोस्ट ऑफ देम आर मोर एम्पैथेटिक इन नेचर. तो एक तरह से ख़वातीन के पार में होने की एक वजह ये भी होनी चाहिए कि आप जो है दूसरों के लिए बेहतर रोल मॉडल बनेगी उन मार्जिनलाइज्ड कम्युनिटीज़ के लिए जिनको अभी तक आवाज़ नहीं मिल सकी है. Moreover, I would like to say that it is not only about softening the images of the departments. For example, I am ASP in police services. My job is not to soften the image in the department. My job is to save or serve the people. And by providing them safety and by providing and them the services that they look up to me for, उनके अंदर ये वाला कॉन्फिडेंस भी आ सकता है कि अगर ये खातून ये कर सकती हैं या ये लड़की ये कर सकती है तो व्हाई नॉट माय डॉटर, व्हाई नॉट माय सिस्टर. इसी तरह से जो छोटी बच्चियां हैं उनके लिए आप एक रोल मॉडल के तौर पे सामने होंगे कि अगर तो ये कर रही हैं तो मैं भी कर लूंगी. वही जैसे मैंने पहले भी मेंशन किया, आई कम फ्रॉम बलूचिस्तान, देयर आर लिटरली no female officers. I am the second one from Balochistan जो इस पोजीशन पे है. तो हम लोगों को तो ये है कि बच्चियां देखती हैं एंड दे आर लाइक कि अच्छा अगर आप ही ये कर सकती हैं तो मैं भी कर सकती हूँ. उससे पहले उनके पास कोई रोल मॉडल ही नहीं था कि क्योंकि पुलिस एक ऐसी जॉब है जिसके अंदर हमें काफ़ी ज़्यादा फिजिकल फिटनेस चाहिए होती है, जिसके अंदर यू हैव टू बी वेरी वेरी करेजियस, यू हैव टू वर्क एट वेरी ऑड आवर्स, आपकी फैमिली लाइफ बहुत हद तक जो है डिस्टर्ब भी हो रही होती है. तो बच्चियों को ज़्यादातर हम लोग इस बात से डिस्करेज करते हैं कि नहीं बेटा उसमें नहीं जाना. माय ओन फादर ही वाज लाइक कि जब मैंने एग्जाम्स दिए ही वाज लाइक कि पुलिस नहीं रखना, एंड आई वाज लाइक ओके लेट्स सी. एंड आई रिमेम्बर द डे माय रिजल्ट केम, ही वाज लाइक कि बेटा ये क्या किया है. And at that day and a few days even after that, he was very worried for me. He loves me a lot, but he was like कि ये पुलिस मतलब और कोई डिपार्टमेंट तुम्हें नहीं मिला था, why did you even choose that? And I was like बाबूजी हो जाएगा. And he was very disturbed, he was worried for my safety. But जब मैं यहाँ आई हूँ तो उसके बाद से थोड़ा टाइम गुजरा है, उनको समझ आई है कि नहीं चीज़ें इस तरह से बेहतर की जा सकती हैं और मेरा होना किस तरह से बाकी लोगों के लिए भी ज़रूरी है. ही इज़ क्वाइट हैप्पी विद दैट. टॉकिंग अबाउट दिस, आज सुबह ही वाज लाइक कि अब तुम वहाँ पे हो ना, हमें मालूम है कि चीज़ें तुम ठीक कर लोगी, तुम हैंडल कर लोगी. एंड इट वाज सच अ बिग थिंग फॉर मी. एंड एक और चीज़ जो मैं बहुत ज़्यादा वो डिस्कस करना चाहूँगी वो ये कि देयर इज सम स्टडी जिसके अंदर ये मेंशन था कि 65% ऑफ द वुमेन जो हैं वो लीडर्स को इस तरह से देखती हैं जो उनके हेल्प कर सकें और जो उनको साथ लेके चल सकें. द थिंग इज दैट कि मेल्स में ये वाली लीडरशिप कम होती है और स्टडीज शो दैट फीमेल्स अगर लीडर्स हों तो उनके अंदर ये वाली लीडरशिप स्किल्स ज़्यादा होती हैं. सो अगर तो हमारे पास उसके ऊपर खवातीन अगर तो हमारे पास पावर पोजीशंस पे खवातीन मौजूद होंगी जो डिफरेंट डिसीजंस ले सकेंगी तो वो अपने साथ साथ बाकी खवातीन को भी लेके चलेंगी. बिकॉज इन दिस पेट्रियार्कल सोसाइटी जब तक हम एक दूसरे का हाथ नहीं पकड़ के चलाएंगे तब तक चीज़ें बेहतर नहीं हो सकती हैं. बिकॉज वी हैव कम अ लॉन्ग वे, लेकिन अब भी इतना कुछ होना है सारी दुनिया में भी और पर्टिकुलरली पाकिस्तान में, जिसके लिए हम सबको आगे इसी तरह से बढ़ना पड़ेगा. थोड़ी सी हिम्मत करनी होती है, थोड़ा सा बूस्ट करना होता है, एंड यू सी द वुमेन डूइंग मैजिक. मोरओवर the studies they have also shown that जो social construction है खवातीन की उसके मुताबिक contrary to the popular belief women are very good listeners, जबकि हमें वेरी गुड टॉकर्स कहा जाता है, बट स्टिल वी आर वेरी गुड लिसनर्स. एंड क्योंकि शुरू से ही बच्चियों के अंदर ये वाली चीज़ होती है कि बेटा आपने घर में बैठना है. मोस्ट ऑफ द गर्ल्स दे आर नॉट encouraged to participate in physical activities. और जब वो घर पे होती हैं उनकी कम्युनिकेशन स्किल्स ज़्यादा बेहतर हो रही होती हैं. कम्युनिकेशन स्किल्स में आपके पास लिसनिंग भी आती है और टॉकिंग भी आती है. That's why females are considered as better communicators. Moreover, their nurturing nature and they have less ego issues as compared to their male counterparts, and they are high in emotional intelligence and are more flexible in decision making process too. इस वजह से खवातीन को प्रेफर किया जाता है ऐसी ऐसी जॉब्स के लिए या ऐसे रोल्स के लिए जहाँ पे आपने नेगोशिएट करना हो। तो जब आपने नेगोशिएट करना है, व्हेन यू वांट अ वुमन टू प्रेजेंट योर पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू टू सम अदर पार्टी, व्हाई नॉट गिव हर अ से इन द डिसीजन टू। जो बात वो करने जा रही है, आप उसमें उसका पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू क्यों नहीं लेते? डोंट एक्ट लाइक कि वो सिर्फ आपका एक फेस होगी कंपनी का और वट एवर इट इज। लेकिन अगर उसकी बात भी सुनी जाएगी, मे बी फॉर योर ओन बेनिफिट या कंपनी का कोई ऐसा बेनिफिट हो जाए जिसके अंदर, क्योंकि एक इंक्लूसिव डिसीजन होगा जिससे दोनों पार्टीज को ज्यादा फायदा पहुंच सके या जिससे सोसाइटी को ज्यादा बेहतर फायदा पहुंच सके। एक चीज जो लाजमी मैं मेंशन करना चाहूंगी, एंड इट इज दैट कि आई नो कि जब हम पावर की बात करते हैं तो वहां पे पावर हंग्री होने की भी बात की जाती है, और पावर हंग्री जब होते हैं तो उसके अंदर बहुत ज्यादा चीजें आ जाती हैं। लेकिन आप किसी भी जेंडर को इस चीज पे तो ब्लेम नहीं कर सकते, बिकॉज evil side is only human, it is second to human nature। और जब भी किसी भी इस तरह की चीज की बात आएगी जिसमें पार हंगर होगी या जिसके अंदर कोई भी गलत चीज होगी, उस चीज को हम ब्लेम नहीं कर सकते कि खवातीन आएंगी तो वो इस तरह से ही करेंगी। थिंग इज कि अगर कोई इस तरह से करता है, आई एम नॉट सेइंग कि सारी खवातीन अगर उसमें होंगी, पावर पोजीशंस पे होंगी तो वो अच्छा ही काम करेंगी, वो गलतियां भी करेंगी जस्ट लाइक देयर मेल काउंटर पार्ट्स टू। एंड फॉर दैट वी हैव टू गिव देम द स्पेस कि ठीक है वो भी इंसान है और उनके पास तो इतने रोल मॉडल्स भी नहीं हैं जो पहले से मर्दों के लिए चले आ रहे हैं। And lastly, the topic that I would really want to shed light upon is that कि हम एक बात करते हैं कि सिविल सर्विसेज जो हमारी होती है इसके अंदर खवातीन का कोटा है, और अब तो 50% खवातीन उसमें इंडक्ट होने लगी हैं, तो कोटे को आप खत्म कर दें। थिंग इज दैट कि वो जो भी खवातीन आ रही हैं वो इसी वजह से शायद आ रही हैं कि उसमें कोटा मौजूद है। द इशू इज कि उनको शायद इतनी बेहतर एजुकेशन की फैसिलिटीज नहीं मिली हुई जिस तरह से मेल काउंटर पार्ट्स को उनके मिली होंगी, या जिस तरह से उनके घरों में उनको उस तरह से सपोर्ट नहीं मिली होगी। आई नो अ लॉट ऑफ फीमेल्स जिन्होंने अपनी फैमिली की मर्जी के बगैर एग्जाम्स दिए और अब जो हैं वो काफ़ी बेहतर हालात में। तो जो कोटा की या किसी उसकी बात होती है कि अगर तो हर चीज़ बराबर हो जाती है तो वहाँ पे फिर हम कोटा ख़त्म कर देंगे। द थिंग इज कि अगर आप कोटा तो उस वक्त ख़त्म करें जब आप सारी जगह पे एजुकेशनल जितनी भी हैं अपॉर्चुनिटीज़ वो भी इक्वल प्रोवाइड कर रहे हो एट फ्रॉम द ग्रास रूट लेवल। अगर आप जॉब अपॉर्चुनिटीज भी इक्वल प्रोवाइड कर रहे हो, और अगर ऐसा नहीं है तो फिर इस चीज को इस वक्त कंसिडर करना गलत है। अगर मैं सिर्फ अपने डिपार्टमेंट की बात करूं तो आज से कोई 10-15 साल पहले देयर weren't एनी फीमेल्स एट आवर पोजीशंस, और वहाँ पे अब जो है माशाल्लाह वी आर लाइक 50 to 60 फीमेल्स, और हर साल नंबर इंक्रीज हो रहा है। और ये सिर्फ इसी वजह से मुमकिन है क्योंकि उन्होंने इंडक्शन शुरू किया, उन्होंने इसके अंदर फीमेल सीट्स दी हैं। देयर वाज अ टाइम जब वहाँ पे फीमेल सीट्स ही नहीं थी, फीमेल्स वर नॉट इवन रिकमेंडेड फॉर द पुलिस डिपार्टमेंट। सो दैट्स इट। आई होप कि आप लोगों ने कोई चीज समझी हो इससे, एंड थैंक यू फॉर कमिंग, एंड आई होप दैट वी ऑल मीट इन सम बेटर सर्कमस्टांसेस। थैंक यू।
Thank you, Ms. Kainat, for sharing such a motivational talk with us. It was truly inspiring and amazing. Our next speaker is extremely talented and fashion is her element. Amna Chaudhary is a writer and activist. Her work has appeared in many places, including the Caribbean and Himmel South Asian. She writes about feminism, popular culture, and the fashion industry. Please welcome Amna Chaudhary.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you to all the speakers that spoke before me. I learned so much today. I also want to thank the team for organizing this event and bringing us all together this evening. And today I'm going to be talking about the fashion industry in Pakistan, not just from the standpoint of someone who reports on and writes about the fashion industry, but also as someone who loves clothes and believes in the transformative potential of what we put on our bodies. And hopefully, I will be able to make a case for why and how the ways in which we think about fashion need to change in order for us to build a fairer and more just world. After all, many people are quick to dismiss fashion as frivolous, but actually, we can understand much of the world through fashion and the fashion industry. Firstly, a very brief history of cotton production in Pakistan. So it's important to know that we are a cotton producing country and cotton is our most important cash crop. And many of us learn this at school in Pakistan studies, where we also learn a little bit about the history of textile production in South Asia. The subcontinent has always produced high quality cotton, and the only way that the British cotton industry could compete in the 18th century was to industrialize and to make cotton at a far cheaper price. And suddenly, Indian markets became flooded with British cotton, and under British imperialism, the Indian cotton industry suffered greatly. The Swadeshi movement, which began in 1906, urged Indians to wear local cloth and boycott what was referred to as Manchester cloth. This highlights for us what foreign and local cloth had come to represent at that time. After independence, a newly formed Pakistan established several cotton mills and factories in order to assert a kind of self sufficiency, and this ability to manufacture cloth and textile very cheaply and efficiently became a great source of national pride for us. Fast forward to today. What is the landscape of the fashion industry in contemporary Pakistan? And this fashion industry is something that affects us all. And how? Through never ending supply chains, relentless lawn campaigns every summer, huge retail stores that sell fast fashion, such as Khadi, Sapphire, Gul Ahmed, and Nishat, the construction of the ideal Pakistani woman via advertising, contract labor that works below minimum wage, factories that operate with no accountability, models who complain of sexual harassment at the workplace, brands that do not allow their workers to unionize, Instagram influencers who never question how the clothes they get in PR are made for fear of rocking the boat, garment workers who are constantly reminded of their expendability, designers taking most of the credit that rightfully belongs to artisans, the declining state of the environment in cities like Faisalabad due to overproduction, the choking of rivers and other water bodies, clothes that are only designed with certain body types in mind, the well documented prevention of factory inspections, as inspections are deemed profit averse, the violence and arrests that protesting textile and garment workers must contend with, and all of this while power and money is increasingly concentrated in the hands of a few. And additionally, let's not forget, a new kind of imperialism is also at play within countries such as Pakistan. Many of the garments produced here are made on order and then exported to other countries. So international brands like H&M, Zara, Mango, Forever 21, Urban Outfitters all buy garments from Pakistan, and yet they choose not to account for their supply chains. Developing countries are dependent on these exports, making it a priority to fulfill international orders as quickly and cheaply as possible. In 2012, the Ali Enterprises Garments Factory, which is located in Baldia town in Karachi, was set on fire, and no less than 264 garment workers were burned to death. Surviving workers have reported that management officials actually tried to save the merchandise before helping workers out of the burning building. The factory produced garments for a German textile brand called Kick Textilien, and it was only after 4 whole years of campaigning that Kick Textilien agreed to pay compensation to these victims' families. Closer to where we are today in 2020, due to the pandemic, many international brands canceled their orders and refused to pay their supply chains. The result was that many garment workers in Pakistan were not paid their salaries for months on end or lost their jobs. When workers protested outside factory gates, they were beaten, shot at, some were arrested, and a year later, many of them remain unemployed. Now, I'm aware that all I've done so far is map out the far ranging issues that the fashion industry has either created or exacerbated in Pakistan, and I have offered no solutions. The reason for this is that there are no easy fixes to a problem as multifaceted and all encompassing as the fashion industry. However, in an attempt to save itself, the fashion industry in Pakistan has tried to offer us some easy solutions. Take, for example, the reusable canvas bags that Sapphire launched in 2019. Maybe some of you remember this, there were ads for this everywhere. This is an effort to tackle waste without having to take real stock of the waste caused by the brand itself. Also, consider the recent attempts by some major brands to include models that are not fair skinned or slim in their advertising campaigns. Always announced with great fanfare on social media, while the majority of their clothes are still designed to fit a narrow percentage of the population. Other examples are smaller brands and boutiques that have cropped up recently, claiming that they believe in slow fashion as well as in producing ethically and sustainably. The clothes many of these smaller businesses make cost more than what an average customer can afford, which raises the question of who this slow and ethical and sustainable fashion is really for then. Thus, the fashion industry also makes the purchase of fashion a moral choice, by which I mean it puts the onus of buying ethically on you and profits off you either way, whether you choose to buy slow or fast fashion. In the next couple of years, I predict that big brands will also put out ethically made lines, priced higher than their regular lines, and with little to no information about what exactly makes them so ethical. Now, if I sound skeptical about these solutions, it is because I believe we need to sit with the uncomfortable truths of the fashion industry, truths that we are also complicit in, if we are ever going to be able to affect real change. The Pakistani fashion industry wants to race towards solutions because if we are constantly looking towards the future, then there is less inclination to think about how we got here in the first place. I want to pause here for a little bit and think about fashion as separate from industry. I want to talk about what fashion has meant to me in my own life. And growing up in a respectable middle class family in Pakistan, you can imagine that fashion was often the subject of heated discussion. The question of what to wear and when and where to wear it was a significant one that dictated much of my own youth. The clothes I put on my body were meant to signal that I was from a respectable family, that I was receiving a decent education, and would go on to work towards the progress of the nation. Looking too Western was disapproved of, but it was also suspect to look too out of touch with the modern world. Clothes were not supposed to express your creativity or imagination. They were only meant to validate your decency and your femininity. When I wore something that expressed another possibility of being, skinny jeans, a brightly colored sari, a boxy suit, I felt the transformative power of fashion. This is why fashion was and continues to be a channel of resistance for me, as I know it must also be for many people listening today. Now, when I say the fashion industry needs to undergo a radical shift, in fact, when I say that fashion needs to divorce itself from the industry, I say this not just because of the state of the industry today, but also because I believe the industry itself has curtailed our attitudes towards fashion. Even though the fashion industry positions itself as one that is inherently creative, the industry actually constrains what we regard as fashion. In Pakistan, women's fashion is meant to express that mythical balance between modernity and tradition and celebrate how Pakistani women are both modern and traditional without being too much or too little of either. And this is the conceptual limit of the fashion industry in Pakistan. And this is also why you see kind of these clothes that these big brands make that look exactly the same too, right? So in a way, even though today we have many, many more options for clothes, in other ways, we are completely limited by what is available to us via the fashion industry. Hence, it is the responsibility of those who love fashion to be critical of the industry as well as to look beyond it. As part of my own work, and as a result of the love for fashion that I discovered growing up, I now write and think about Pakistani brands and advertising because I want to dissect their constructions of womanhood and the nation state. We cannot begin to build a new narrative without first understanding the insidiousness of the one we are fed on a daily basis. In the same spirit, I decided to make an Instagram account. This is the Mod Squad, because Instagram is where so much fashion campaigning and advertising in Pakistan takes place now. I wanted to situate a critical approach to Pakistani fashion within a space where the fashion industry is rarely questioned. And I also wanted the fashion industry to know that we are watching them, right? And there's someone watching them, not just me, but a whole host of people who are watching them. And they want to really dissect what are these messages, right? In a way, I want the fashion industry to know that it cannot get away with what it's doing right now. So, what about looking beyond? Looking beyond the industry requires more than just quick and easy short term solutions, the kind of short term solutions that the fashion industry has offered itself. It requires more than a couple of experts, it requires more than just me. Obviously, it requires the power of our collective imagination. And together, it becomes possible for us to imagine a world where fashion is no longer a commodity and the bodies that produce fashion are not sites of ownership and violence. A world where clothes do not define how respectable we are, where trends are not dictated by luxury brands, where the designer is not a benevolent authority and artisans are truly respected for their craft. A world where factories are eliminated, where garment workers are paid a living wage, and where we return to skills that only a generation ago many people, such as our mothers, possessed, such as sewing and mending and even designing our own clothes. And it's obviously because of the fashion industry that many of us don't possess those skills anymore, because fashion has become so readily available and also so affordable that many of us don't have the skills that a generation ago a lot of people did possess. Now, fashion can be about so much more than purchasing endless garments in order to purchase various identities at the cost of both the environment and the undervalued labor of others. Fashion can show us other ways of relating to the world and each other, and ways that we already know, in fact. If we can share and borrow clothes, then we can build community. If we can reuse, restore, and upcycle clothes, then we can cultivate relationships with material things beyond merely purchasing them. If we can resist the pressure to buy clothes that will placate everyone, then we are defying respectability politics. If we allow for inconsistencies in our personal aesthetics, then we remember not to take fashion and ourselves too seriously. If we can come together to hold brands accountable, then we prove we are not just merely consumers, but that we too have a stake in this world and a stake in the clothes that we put on our bodies. If we agitate and organize for textile and garment workers to receive a living wage, we are saying we value the lives of many over the profits of a few. If we do all of these things together, then we can begin to create a world, one that is free from the fashion industry, in which every single one of us may clothe ourselves as we please. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Amna. It goes without saying that that was truly a very inspirational talk. And the challenges that you've talked about, I think these are things that we see on a daily basis, but no one really talks about them. So the way that you've put them out and the way that you've highlighted them, hats off to you and more power to you. Thank you for sharing all of this with us. We're truly honored to have you. Thank you, ma'am. Before we move on to our most awaited speaker for tonight, I think it's time for yet another amazing performance that we have planned for you. It's always enlightening to listen to some good soulful music, and so I would like to invite Ibrahim Yusuf. He has been performing in innumerable music events since the past 7 years, and talking about just FCCU, he's performed in over 50 events to date. Currently, he is the assistant music coordinator at the Foreman Music Society. He has won several incredible competitions and has also sung for Radio Pakistan. This experience of his in itself is so phenomenal that I think without further ado, I would just like to invite him. So over to you, Ibrahim.
to perform in this event, especially because of the presence of our rector and vice rector of the university. And I just want to ask that, am I audible?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes, you are. Yes.
Can you let me know, am I audible?
Yes, Ibrahim, you are audible.
I'm going to perform a ghazal composed in Rag Yaman Kalyan, also known as Yaman Kalyan, which is sung by Madam Farida Khanam. Aaj jaane ki zid na karo, and along with me for percussion, my brother is playing tabla. He is also a Formanite and Luminite, graduated in 17th series. And I hope you'll enjoy my performance. Thank you so much. इनको खो कर मेरी जान उम्र भर ना तरसते रहो ना करो Thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed. Thank you so much once again.
Thank you guys for such a lovely performance. We truly, truly enjoyed it. It goes without saying how talented you guys are. Thank you so much. And now it is time for the talk we have all been waiting for, our showstopper. We are proud to announce our last speaker for the evening, who is our very own rector, Dr. Jonathan Adlerton. He has been a US Aid Mission Director 5 times. He has also served as a US Ambassador to Mongolia and US Aid Representative to the European Union. He has also worked for the World Bank and the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. His notable publications include the titles Some Far and Distant Place, Mongolia and the United States, A Diplomatic History, and The Dust of Kandar, A Diplomat Among Warriors in Afghanistan. Currently, he's serving as the rector of Foreman Christian College University. Under his strong leadership and expertise, FCCU is sure to thrive and achieve never-ending success and prestige. Please welcome our rector, Dr. Jonathan Adlerton.
Okay, I guess it's starting right now. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, sir.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. It's certainly an honor to be here, and thank you for that introduction. I did want to start with a shout out to what I've just heard, the four speakers, but also the two musical events. I guess I was writing down things like brilliant, inspiring, challenging, thought-provoking, and also sobering in some cases, some of the presentations in terms of some of the issues that we face in Pakistan and certainly beyond as well. The music was also great. I think on occasions like this, all that you can really say is wah, wah, bahut zabardast, fantastic. I mean, just both of them were really wonderful. I've called this talk 7 Steps Following a Path Toward Pakistan. And of course, it draws on that first comment, one step forward, which is the theme of tonight. At first, I thought, well, this is about one momentous decision or perhaps a life-changing event or something that people have faced, sometimes even a life-threatening event, and how that teaches you the fragility of life and how that certainly affects you in all kinds of ways. Maybe one could talk about a physical or spiritual challenge as well. But then, of course, I did think about, well, my recent step forward was to come to Pakistan. So I thought, well, maybe that's the one I should talk about, one step forward, this coming to Pakistan. But then I also thought, well, maybe just that one step is too limited because everything that we do is built on previous steps. And I guess this is how I came across this sort of 7 steps forward, actually 7 steps, all of them spent in Pakistan, which shaped my life into what it is today. At a more maybe trivial level, I don't know if any of you played this in your childhood, but when I grew up, there was a game called Mother May I? And you sort of started off in the courtyard and then, someone said, take 2 giant steps forward or 2 baby steps or whatever. And you could take those. But if you didn't say first, Mother May I, you were sent back to the beginning of the line. And I don't know if this is supposed to be a children's game that's supposed to teach you patience or maybe politeness or maybe obey your parents. Maybe that was the lesson, Mother May I. But the reality is, it was a game of steps forward and steps back, which I think maybe in some ways was a precursor to life. This notion of, I've titled my talk, 7 Steps Following a Path Toward Pakistan. I suppose it also draws on other books that I've read. One of them is a book called 39 Steps. I don't know if anybody's heard of it. It's a Scottish author, John Buchan, basically a crime thriller, which is kind of interesting. There's also actually a wonderful book by the Trappist monk, Thomas Merton, called The 7-Story Mountain, It's funny, my father said many years ago that this was a book that inspired him. It's a remarkable story many decades ago, but I think it's interesting to read. And of course, there's also bestsellers that some people may have been introduced to and are often in business school curriculums, seven Habits of Highly Effective People. So this number 7, I think, is also kind of reviewed as sort of a perfect number, if you will. But anyway, I think that what is true is that, as we take these steps in our life, we do tend to look back. And that gets me into this image of the path forward is sometimes obscured by mountains. We see clouds up ahead. However, looking back, at least for me, there's been a pattern. And I think it's remarkable and in some ways inspiring. Some ways we look back and we think, well, some of those steps might have been even foreordained. What it does remind me of, I don't know if anybody has heard this expression, but it's the great Danish theologian Søren Kierkegaard, who basically said life must be lived forward, but understood backwards. And maybe as you grow older, you look back and you have longer to look back on, maybe it becomes more compelling or more real. But this notion that life must be lived forward, but understood backwards, I think is one that's been a hallmark in my life. That one comes from Kierkegaard. There's a couple, I don't know if I'm stealing them from somebody else, but I think I invented them because they've also been touchstones in my life. One is that we are what we remember. And for me, in my life, looking back, this notion of memory is important. And then another one, and I think it was the issue of hope, I think was mentioned by our first speaker. And one of my comments there is, because I try to look at the positive, is I'll take hope wherever I can find it. And sometimes it's hard to find, but I will always find that hope wherever it is. The reality is, of course, when you think like that, it does root your time, your existence in this wrinkle of time, your life on earth to where you start, which of course everybody had a starting journey. Before, from my perspective, those first steps even started before I learned to walk. Because life did become a series of steps forward, a series, sort of chapters, if you will. What I thought I would do would be to look back on that life, if you will, those chapters, and focus for me on the chapters that since this is an introduction kind of thing, is to focus on the chapters I spent in Pakistan. I actually used that image the last time before now when I was in Pakistan, which was after the earthquake, and I talked to our staff before I left. And one of the things when I finished my remarks is I said, I've spent all these chapters of my life, I think there were 7 that I enumerated at that time, and I said, I'm not so sure I don't have one more chapter to spend in Pakistan. And in any case, that's what I sort of said more as a joke, perhaps, not realizing that 13 years later, 12 years later, I would be back in Pakistan. So let me again go through some of those comments that has brought me here, brought me back to Foreman. The first step, if you will, was that birth and childhood in Pakistan. If you want to say the Mother May I game, it was the longest and biggest step of all because it was the first 18 years of my life. And sometimes I look back and think that's kind of improbable. I've always told people that that children, and I thought about our own kids as well, you are incredibly lucky and privileged, or at least parents, if they can, should try to give kids an early sense for the physical beauty of the world around you. And I felt I was very fortunate to have that in Murray, to grow up and see in a very clear day, actually, in those days, at least you could see Nanga Parbat in one direction, and of course the Pir Panjal Range and Kashmir in the other. What's happening. So again, I was fortunate to have this time in Pakistan. It also included trips to Quetta, and I know one of the speakers was from Balochistan, which what a wonderful part of Pakistan that is. Travel to the Kirtar Mountains in Western Sindh, as a guest actually of someone that we knew in the Chandio tribe. Spent the last couple of years in Hyderabad, close to the Indus River, that river after which Sindh is named, and which is in some senses truly the lifeblood of Pakistan. I used to walk, our house was not too far from the river, in evenings, just go and watch those sunsets, and also get that sense for Sindh and what Sindh has meant to Pakistan. Of course, I'm thinking also of those visits to the shrines at places like Bitshah and Saiwan Sharif, the Karachi coast, and even a trip toward Umarkot, which is, again, one of those stupendous parts of Pakistan. I might mention that a few, earlier this week, maybe 4 or 5 days ago, I got a surprise email. It was a guy in Larkana who sent me a photograph and said, "My father took this picture 50 years ago. Is this you?" And it was indeed me, and talk about, your life coming together in that kind of way. But of course, I did have to leave Pakistan at the age of 18. I left with 2 classmates. We said our goodbyes. We hopped on a bus from Peshawar, went to Kabul, Kandahar, Herat, Tehran, Tabriz, on into Istanbul and Europe. And that was my goodbye. I sort of wondered if I would ever come back, to be honest. And I later wrote a book about this called Some Far and Distant Place. And somebody asked me, they said, "So far in distance, is that because Pakistan was far from America or America was far from Pakistan?" And I kind of don't know which one it is, but I thought, thinking of our second speaker, that it was me going back I know that, sort of questions of identity, you have Pakistani Americans, which is a large number over time. The American Pakistanis are a smaller number, but I've often thought in those terms, and I think that both of us have been able to, in some sense, bridge these what some people think are big differences. In any case, I did return to Pakistan sooner than I thought. About 3 years later, I had a scholarship from Northwestern to come back, and this was an undergraduate scholarship, and basically took me to Islamabad, to Quaid-e-Azam University, and I did a paper. It was a self-study, actually, about relations between Pakistan and the Middle East. And again, not to go into details, that later became the theme of my dissertation. So again, talking about steps building on other things. This was an undergraduate paper, but it also later became my dissertation. I do remember coming back at that time. I took a trip. I stopped briefly in the Middle East. After all, that was one of the themes. But I got into Karachi. And of course, what I often do is I like to travel by land rather than by air. And I took the train up. And I still remember the sights, sounds, and smells that, after being 3 years away, I think the most powerful things that you have are what you experience as a kid growing up. And they first came back very strongly. I remember on that platform in Karachi and that familiar chai chai, garam chai, chai chai, garam chai, which really made me think I am back in Pakistan. And it was a wonderful experience in all kinds of ways. And again, that later formed the basis for my for my PhD dissertation. Unexpectedly, that was at Northwestern University. Then my graduate school was at Tufts. And I also got a chance to come back. I saw the sign on the wall that said, Berkeley Urdu Language Program in Pakistan, in Lahore, as a matter of fact. And it was a 10-week Urdu language program, and I applied. I'll be honest, I had mercenary reasons. This was basically my free ticket back to Pakistan. And I did come back. It was only 10 weeks. It was in Shadman Colony. We were put in different houses, and remarkably, the house that I stayed in was the sister of the renowned Urdu novelist Qudrat Alan Haider. I don't know if you've read her book, Aag Ka Darya, River of Fire, but I think it's one of the classics of Urdu literature. And I think what a privilege it was to actually spend 10 weeks with her sister. So that was, 2, and then 2 trips back after my childhood. Now we're on to chapter 4, which was actually one of those shorter ones. I guess I mentioned Mother May I suppose a baby step. It was very short. It was only 3 weeks. By now, I was a junior officer at USAID. This was in 1984. The numbers of refugees in Pakistan were increasing every year. What was dominating the television at the time was actually the famine in Ethiopia. And in an international global sense, the UN and other agencies were concerned that was Afghanistan going to experience something similar in terms of the famine? And in those pictures, actually, they're from Africa, but they kind of were concerned. And so I was sort of the junior guy on this little trip, sent out, obviously with government approval, and they provided our itinerary, and it basically involved interviewing interviewing Afghan refugees that were coming out in Peshawar, in Bajor, and other places. And it was fascinating. It was nice to come back in some sense, perhaps in a constructive role. We did conclude that Afghanistan was in a difficult situation, but it was not a a famine on the lines of what Ethiopia was experiencing. But it kind of, I suppose, also got me into the development field too. What happens next is the chapter 5, and returning to Pakistan as an aid officer. That was a pretty long chapter, and certainly affected my life in all kinds of ways. But I came back this time. It was for 4 years. This was a training. I was, again, the junior person on the block. I just joined as a foreign service officer. It was a wonderful thing. And I might say that my colleagues said, how on earth was your first aid assignment in Pakistan, a country you were at least somewhat familiar with? Why didn't they send you to Bolivia or Nigeria or something like that? Because that's the way bureaucracies tend to do. But I did get that experience of my first assignment was in a country I was familiar with. And it was, again, I feel very fortunate when I look back and see that. It was a big aid program at the time. One of the things that, since coming back to Foreman, I talked to Dr. Kasur Malik, and he's mentioned to me that some of those scholarships that aid provided at the time helped establish the biotech industry in Pakistan. And of course, we worked actually with some of the ag universities in the Peshawar, Faisalabad, Jamshora, with Park and NARC as well. In some sense, it was the start of my professional life. But I'll also say it marked the beginning of real personal changes. And this gets into something people could talk about the balance between the personal and the professional. Before coming to Islamabad, people would say, well, where are you headed? What's your first assignment as a foreign service officer? And I would say, I'm going to Islamabad. And the line there was, Islamabad, very little social life, no chance of romance. So that was the guiding advice I got. And you have to know that I've spent my life trying to prove other people wrong. And I've also spent my life trying to break stereotypes. And so not long after I arrived, I met Miss Fiona Riak, who was a teacher at the British School in Islamabad. And not too many weeks later, we were engaged, and we were married 7 months after we met, and it's proved to be a lifetime enduring relationship with 3 kids that I might briefly mention. But she fortunately shared my sense of adventure. And in those 4 years, we explored everything from the Pasu Peaks north of Hunza to other places. And this was not a 5-star hotel kind of arrangement. Sometimes it was under a tent. Sometimes we were riding on a motorcycle. I'm a bit of a tightwad. Some people say mucky chus, as they say. That was part of it too. So we stay in tea shops sometime, and it's all cool and wonderful. When we left Pakistan at the time, we went to the travel office and we said, we want to buy the ticket from Rawalpindi to Karachi. We want this last look at the whole length of Pakistan. They said, what? You want to go by train? Anyway, we hopped the train and we got that 24-hour journey across Pakistan. And I will say, now we're up to 1989. My thoughts as I looked out that window as Punjab going past and then Upper Sindh with its date trees, I am the luckiest person in the world. This too is part of my life. I've been privileged to live it. This too has made me what I am today. So again, another brief chapter, the 90s we're at right now. Now the kids have come along. We want to introduce them to this country that's meant so much to us. And believe it or not, when we were in Sana, when we were in Pretoria, when we were in Almaty, when we were in Amman, we get a vacation. If you're in, I think the Pakistan Foreign Service probably has that too. You get a trip every 2 years, and our trips are always to Pakistan. And our travel office would say, what, you're going again to Pakistan? So in the 90s, we actually went back 4 times and took different vacations. None of these were official, but they did take us to some wonderful places, as you can appreciate in Pakistan. In fact, I think there's no way to better express my I'll call it love for Pakistan than the fact that we took so many vacations there in the early years of our marriage. Now we're in the sort of the final chapter before here, and this was the unlikely one to come back. I had been a junior officer at the aid mission. I was going to come back as mission director. I was in Cambodia at the time. There was that October 2005 earthquake that killed 80,000 Pakistanis, leaving another 3 million homeless. It was a terrible event, but it was also an event that drew Pakistan together and indeed drew the international community. I know relationships among countries, between countries are like a roller coaster, but something like this happened, and it really was a rewarding time to be there, to be responsible for that program that was supposed to build back better. And indeed, we did build in cooperation with our counterparts. One of them, of course, being General Nadeem, who at that time was head of the Pakistan Earthquake Relief and Reconstruction Agency. He was led the Pakistan effort, and of course, because we were involved, had a good relationship with him. He was actually an Army helicopter pilot, and we'd fly up sometimes to the northern areas, which again was rewarding in every which way that you can imagine. I did visit Foreman. That was the start of our relationship. They were building providing equipment and later built Hope Towers. Peter Armacost asked me to dinner, or to lunch, I should say, as a mission director. And so unbelievably, I had dinner in the house that's now my dining room here. And at the time, I couldn't imagine I would ever return to Pakistan. And yet, I did have that chance to return, and feel so grateful for it. Gave that speech as I was leaving after that very memorable year, which also involved a lot of travel. That was the first time I got to Makran and to other places in the southwest of Gwadar and other places as well, to add to some of the other trips that we had taken. And so again, said my goodbyes as I always do. Is this the last time? Is this the last time I'll be in Pakistan? But I did hold out that hope to my colleagues. I said, I'm not sure. There may be one more chapter of my life to spend here. So I did go on to those other, other 8 years later. I retired in January 2017. I taught for a couple of years at my hometown university, kept up with what was happening, was engaged to some extent with the Friends of Foreman, always had a place in my heart for it. But again, got the call to come back here and felt really fortunate. Relatively recent, there was the inauguration about 3 months ago, I suppose, and one of the pastors told me afterwards, he said, Jonathan, this is the hardest job you'll ever have. And he might be right. I'm not sure. We'll see about that. But it's a challenge. But it's also a wonderful challenge. Of course, it's tough to come in the middle of the pandemic. But I'm delighted to be here. Delighted to have this opportunity. I think our first speaker said, or maybe it was our second, I've always wanted to be involved in a TED Talk. This is the first for me as well. So here it is on the screen because of COVID-19. There were a couple of ways I was going to end, but I think what I'll end is something I say in this book, Some Far and Distant Place, is that growing up in Pakistan gave me a life that was filled with wonder and astonishment. If I had written it again, this was written quite a few years ago, I would have added gratitude to that list. And I think when I look at life, this sort of combination of gratitude, wonder, and astonishment is really important. People can choose how they look at life. And again, there's, I could go into some of the challenges, and I mentioned some of the life and death experiences and other things that affect and shape your life. But what they do is they show you how precious it is. And, rather than lessening this notion of wonder and astonishment, even gratitude, they heighten it. So I'll finish with kind of like the way I started. I used this a couple of days ago for the first time, but I thought, hey, that's a nice way to talk. Attitude toward life, wah. How fantastic is that? Those were the words I heard at a Mashara given by Fez Ahmed Fez at Boston University. And when I heard them read that Urdu poetry, I thought, fantastic. This was in graduate school, so it was quite a long time ago, but wah. And then I thought I had the privilege, of course, to serve in Mongolia. And you may not know, but the expression there that you hear around a campfire on the Mongolian steppe, and you imagine the nomads all those years ago, the Mongolian troopers, of course, getting ready for battle, I suppose, but they're sitting around the fire and their words are za. Sounds a bit like wah to me. And then the final comment, of course, is wow. And I have got to think, I'm waiting for the linguist to tell me it's true, that wah was the origins of the English word wow. And that to this day is my attitude toward life. Wow, aren't we lucky to have this years on planet Earth? So thank you very much.
Thank you so very much, sir. I personally very much enjoyed that talk. And I love how you explained so perfectly how your story in particular is, an amalgamation of different steps. So it's never just one step, it's always an amalgamation of different steps. And in your case, every step has a beautiful story of its own. And that really is the beauty of your story. Thank you so much for sharing such an inspiring life story and the entire journey that you've basically been through. We're sure you're going to do wonders ahead as well and take the story to even more better and greater heights. So thank you so much. Thank you for being here. Before we officially move to the conclusion, I would just like to invite our co-organizer, Subhavish Sajid, to talk about the theme of today's event, because we were doing this in the beginning, but we all know the charm of online events is disconnectivity. So we're just going to have her talk about the theme once again, and after that we will officially conclude. So over to you, Subhavish.
Thank you so much, Amina. Good evening, everyone. I'm Subhavish. And first of all, thank you so much for joining us here today. So they say that every step forward is a step towards achievement. And we believe that even if you have to take some steps backwards, that one step forward prevails over everything. We might not understand this during the difficult times or the time when we struggle, but the reality is that growth and development is not linear. Every journey has its triumphs and setbacks. What counts is the courage to start that journey. And then every step we take becomes the catalyst for an entire movement. We had incredible speakers today who helped us in understanding what it means to take a step ahead, what drives people to take that one step. And can one single step or a series of small steps change lives forever? So, moving forward opens new doors and opportunities. One should always move at their own pace, even if they have to take the small steps, because after all, that one step forward prevails over everything. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Bhavish, for summing everything up so perfectly. I would just like to once again thank all our speakers for being here with us today. It was truly an honor and a privilege to have you amongst us. And I'm sure the audience had an absolutely fantastic time listening to such, remarkable talks. To give the final concluding note, I would like to invite our organizer, Natalia Naseem. Natalia, any last concluding words, please? Over to you.
So I just want to say, they say that it's the first step that's the hardest, and this was our motivation in bringing you the theme of One Step Forward. We wanted to bring together bright minds and inspiring lives and share their ideas and stories with all of us, inspire us to take our very own one step forward in our personal lives and our general community. When we first began creating this event, honestly, we were quite apprehensive, especially things were very uncertain due to COVID. We weren't really sure if we would be able to do justice to the platform. However, now as we come to the end of our program, I realize that this step forward of hosting the first ever live TEDxFC College, it would have been impossible without the people around us. Sir Kandil, our student activities manager, with his unwavering support in these uncertain times, has been our liaison between the society and FC College. Sir Jaffer, who is quite honestly the best advisor and mentor we could ask for, he gave us full creative freedom and allowed us to make the event our own. Our speakers, especially who joined us today, believed in our vision and also gave it their all despite the online platform, especially our rector, Sir Jonathan Addleton. He was always willing to take time out for us, always there with a smile to work for us, and he provided our society with a very empowering platform. Last but not the least, our very own TEDxFC College team, our two designers, Osman and Aksa, our publications managers, Khurram and Majabeen, Mustafa, who managed our communications, Alina, who was working with photography, but it was mostly digital this time, Alina, Mishma, our social media manager, Savez and Amik, who are managing the entire live event and made it possible for us to even have it. Our four curators, Aima, Amina, Umama, Roshni, and of course Subhavish, our co-organizer. Without all their dedication and creativity, this event, I think, would have been entirely impossible. It has been an invaluable experience for me, and I hope we have managed to give you all an unforgettable evening as well. Thank you very much for your support to all the faculty members and all the guests who joined us today through Zoom and through YouTube. I hope you all had a great time with us.
We would just like to request our live audience to kindly mention their email addresses in the comment section on YouTube. A short TEDx official survey form will be sent to you in which you can give your feedback about the event. So that is it. That is all from our end. Once again, thank you to all the fabulous speakers. Thank you so much for being such an amazing and wonderful audience. Take care and good night. Hope to see you all next year. Thank you.